In my previous videos in this series, I finished the Tomb of Horrors. Written to have an epic final battle conclusion, the fact of the matter is that this Joust challenge took all of the air out of that particular conclusion. I've tried to bring something new to the Joust challenge instead of simply a high score chase. By comparing the various console versions that I was able to get my hands on, I missed a few, most notably the PC. I got a chance to see many different versions of one of my favorite games. As a gamer, what more can you ask for? However, in addition, I wanted to give something back to the community. There's my kitty. She's giving back too. The discussion and rankings may not be an original idea, but all of the opinions in this video are mine and hopefully unique enough to stand out in a sometimes saturated market. Let's get to the jousting.
Arcade, 1982. For old guys like me, arcade games represented the pinnacle of video games. When home consoles first released, and they became more popular, we constantly compared them to the arcade equivalent. How were the graphics, the sound, gameplay? Gradually, the consoles surpassed the arcades. And that way, this video serves a dual purpose. First, as a way to complete the challenge, but also as a time capsule to show that evolution. If you've ever watched any of my previous videos, this admission won't come as much as a surprise. I actually never played the arcade version of Joust until recently. When it released, I was too young. When I finally got the chance, I was the mom meme. We have Joust at home. Yes, the 2600 version. But I didn't know any better. Hell, I love simply having Pac-Man at home, poor port or not. So believe me, I enjoyed the 2600 version of Joust. 2600, 1983. Graphics, passable. Sound, annoying. Gameplay, spot on. Interface, good enough. Graphics, understandably limited due to technological constraints. Monocolored PCs and NPCs, plus the recognizable screen flicker. However, recognizable enough that it doesn't detract from the enjoyment of the game. I'd say the same about Pac-Man, but I think most agree with me on this one. Also, animations do much of the heavy lifting in this category. Sound. The sounds are much less nuanced. The flap and kill sound suffer the most. Because the flap sound occurs all the time, the repetition grates on the ears. Plus the kill sound, so much like that it just becomes a cacophony, but the egg grab and stop screech more than make up for it. I used to run to stop just to hear that sound as much as possible. Gameplay. It's clear that they sacrificed the graphics and sound to give the best possible gameplay experience. Watching the two versions side by side shows that you're playing essentially the same game, with different sprites and sound library. Seriously, I'm always impressed by what they did with this system. Interface. Not as detailed, but it gives you what you need. It shows your score and number of lives. In between levels, it updates the interface to tell you what level you just started. Overall, taken just based on graphics and sound, this one fails mightily. However, the gameplay more than makes up for the shortcomings. Eventually, if you play long enough, you barely even notice. I don't recommend it if you want the full experience, but it's not bad for what it is. 7800, 1986. Graphics improved. Sound much improved. Gameplay tweaked. Interface closer still. Graphics not arcade perfect, but improved over the 2600. My father once sold us the 7800 with backwards compatibility, parenthetically something I still treasure on a console, and parenthetical, and better graphics. While not one to be overly impressed with graphics, I must say that this one impressed me. More defined sprites. The jousters are two colors instead of one. More faithful rock formations in the background. Sound. This most represents the quote-unquote "this is them now" meme. Gone are the annoying grating flap and kill sounds. In are the way more arcade accurate sounds. Even the other passable sounds on the 2600 get a glow up in this version. Virtually flawless. Gameplay. The one thing that the 2600 emulated very well. They improved on it here as well. Mostly, all it needed was some tweaking around the edges. Tighter controls, better interactions with other jousters, and the background add up to a smoother experience overall. Interface. Again, major tweaks that are mostly quality of life improvements. Everything in the arcade interface is here, even the beginning of the level titles. Is it truly Joust if you don't get called buzzard bait? Overall, probably the best overall home version of the game. Not perfect, but it has enough of everything to qualify for the title. Always remember the 7800 as this doomed console because of Atari's role in the crash. Games like this prove it could have been Atari versus Nintendo versus Sega. NES, 1988. Graphics, passable. Sound, minimal. Gameplay, sluggish. Interface, comparable. Graphics. The backgrounds are detailed. The sprites are colorful. They're also malformed. Not sure how to describe it. Like they're fat. They look like they compress them horizontally and vertically. The whole look is just very jarring, and I can't get over it. Sound. With increased processing power comes better sound. This version most closely sounds like the arcade version. I give it props there, but so much else of it makes it much less fun to play. The graphics just mentioned are only the beginning. Gameplay. I can't figure it out if this is due to the malformed sprites or the actual programming, but the gameplay feels very sluggish. It affects both player and computer-controlled jousters, so I think that there's just something askew about the game's inner workings. Like the already mentioned graphics, this makes the game much less fun. Interface. The basics are there and similar to the arcade setup. However, some of the features are missing. There's no buzzard bait. In fact, none of the sub-level messages show up. Minor when compared to the graphics and gameplay, but they all add up to make for a less fun experience. Overall, because of all of this, I consider this version one of the least fun to play. It might actually be the least fun, now that I think about it. Yeah, it just might about be the weakest console version of the game. Game Boy, 1995. Graphics, sound, interface, all simple. Gameplay, hectic. Graphics. No surprise, but the Game Boy loses much of the nuance of the arcade title. There's a little difference between the sprites. Admittedly, they do as much as they can with the grayscale palette, and they give us a good rendition of it. So, that's a positive. Sound. Not as bad as the 2600, but not great either. Not a surprise given the limitation of the system. However, still disappointing. I admit that I know nothing about programming games. With that being said, I still feel like they could have squeezed more sounds into this one. Gameplay. While I commend them for getting the background right, it affects the gameplay with all of that on screen. That makes it difficult to maneuver sometimes and leads to inadvertent death. Other times, it's just annoying and even a bit frustrating. Interface. Similar to the NES as far as the basic information. No buzzard bait, but it does announce the survival wave and the egg wave. It may seem like small additions. When combined, they do add so much to the overall experience. Overall, surprisingly fun, in spite of the limitations forced by the system. The in-between cards take some getting used to if you play the versions that teleport you back in, but I guess they couldn't figure out how to fit that into this particular version. Game Boy Color, 1999. Graphics, NES Lite. Sound, almost perfect. Gameplay, smooth. Interface, perfect. After playing the NES version of the game, I can't help but compare that version to this one. The sprites and animations are identical to the NES game, but they weren't put through the squishing machine. Whoever created this game learned from that mistake. Sound, on par with the 7800 version. Again, fully admitting that I know little about programming, either software or hardware, but it shocks me how much better this version is than the original Game Boy. Nominally, there's little difference between them. In terms of the difference between these games, they feel worlds apart. Gameplay. Speaking of worlds apart, the background is similar to the Game Boy and the original. However, it doesn't have the same frustrations as the Game Boy. Rather, the controls are smooth, the gameplay fun, and the experience reminds me fondly of the 7800. Gonna be tough to choose between the two of them. Interface. Buzzard bait is there. Announcement of what level you're playing is there. The bottom banner shows your score and number of lives. The background contains all islands, lava, and grabby hand. Overall, possibly the best playing experience. In fact, it might just be the best playing experience. I played after the NES and Game Boy, so maybe that biased my opinion. I will need to go back and play them both again before putting together the final list. Lynx, 1992. Graphics, Game Boy Color-like. Sound, limited. Gameplay, sluggish. Interface, perfect. Graphics, similar to the Game Boy Color. The two color sprites, similar to the NES though, it suffers from animation stutter quite a bit. I knew the Lynx existed, and I might even thought of buying it at the time. Now that I actually got a chance to play some of the games, I'm glad that I discovered the Game Boy Advance instead. I still argue that's about the most perfect console. An Atari Lynx in this house would have collected dust. Sound, limited as well. I never thought the sound profile was so complex, but many of these handhelds of the time just couldn't handle it. Really goes to show, once again, how talented earlier programmers were that they accomplished so much with so little. Then again, programmers these days always find ways to push the system after working with it for a few years. Gameplay, the choppy animations and sluggish controls make this one another annoying version to play. Not quite as bad as the NES or Game Boy version, but still bad enough that I'll never play it again. Unless some rich sugar daddy out there wants to pay me big bucks to stream it for some reason. Yeah, just shows that I'm not above being bought. Interface. The one thing that they figured out and mostly nailed in every version, except the 2600, is the interface. This one includes the small quality of life additions that I've already talked about. It also nails the backgrounds and additional detail. Overall, definitely on the bottom half of the countdown, in whatever place just above the NES version, honestly. Some people I recently learned absolutely love the Lynx. I am not among them. Give me Nintendo handhelds all day. SLucas.me presents.
That's my parenthetically probably too in-depth and parenthetical breakdown of various console Joust ports for each other and the arcade. I really struggled with that number one spot. But in the end, I think nostalgia just handed it to the 7800. It's one memory I have of childhood where I saw the leaping graphics, sound, and gameplay. We all knew the inevitable death of arcades was imminent. Some of us maybe just saw it sooner. There's still a happy ending, thanks to two innovations. One, nostalgia led to barcades and the ability to play the original cabinets again. Two, and my favorite, emulation allows you to get as close as possible to the consoles. Well, almost. A market in restoring / reselling or releasing old consoles gives you the chance to play them in that form as well. The second is really just emulation, but whatever. What do you think? Did I get it right? Do you have another list? Drop it in the comments, and I will be sure to answer. As always, thanks for watching. You can find me, if you haven't already, at www.slucas.me. I have articles. I'm going to put up an article about Supergirl, and there's some other articles up there about various comics and movies right now. I've been focusing more on TikTok and YouTube recently, so not as much on the main page, but I'm also going to migrate to Guys Gaming at some point. I'm also on TikTok, as I mentioned. That's where NoobDad76, and YouTube, NoobDad131. I will be back with my next video later on in the week. It's going to be a focus on the Game Boy version of Donkey Kong. And then after that, I'm going to move on to the Game Boy Advance in my retro series. As always, stay safe, be good, and have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.